Hello, and welcome to Gimme Shelter Security in Azure. Today we're going to talk about virtual machine security and protection. I'm Dwayne Netwick. I am a Microsoft certified trainer and regional lead, as well as an Azure MVP. I am a cloud training architect lead at Opsagility with multiple Azure certifications and experience within the industry. And today our topics are going to talk about virtual machines. So as we've gone through and we hit on a lot of defense in depth and zero trust and identity throughout this series, we're getting into some specific services as we go through here. And first off is virtual machines. We're going to talk about some things around virtual machine templates, remote access, update management, and encryption. And then we're going to go through some virtual machine recommendations that you might find in Security Center that might help you out and help guide your way into your best practices for your defense in-depth strategy for protecting virtual machines. So as we talk about templates, we're talking about things utilizing ARM templates with JSON code and utilizing like desired state configuration capabilities within the Azure portal to build templates on what our baseline virtual machines are going to look like, to improve consistency and to have ways to deploy quickly our resources, reduce those error-prone tasks with when you're just creating a virtual machine within the portal that might take place that create errors. And then also to promote reuse and to create, as I said before, these baselines that are necessary in terms of utilizing extensions for malware protection and say Network Watcher and other monitoring capabilities within your virtual machine, and your VNet, having all these things together and have those built within a simple template can help to maintain that baseline. And then if somebody else comes behind and needs to deploy a virtual machine, they can continue to use that template, and you are then governing your resources properly. Second piece to talk about here is remote access management. And when we think about remote access, we think a lot about utilizing remote desktop protocol port 3389 or SSH protocol port 22 for Linux devices. Those are well and good, but those obviously have a certain level of vulnerability to them, especially if you're leaving them exposed to the internet, which I hope nobody is. There are a couple of different ways to protect on that. We'll talk about just-in-time virtual machine access in a moment. There's also the Bastion host capability within the Azure environment that has become popular over the last 6 months or so as it came out of public preview and went general availability. Azure Bastion does a lot of the similarities that you'll find when you create a jump box within your environment. But the thing that Azure Bastion does rather than a jump box is it lets you into your virtual machine without having to hit a device that is that has an operating system. This is strictly just a point-to-point connection where you log in directly within your virtual machine through the Bastion subnet. There's no public exposure of that virtual machine of any ports, but it gives you the same experience that you would get with RDP or SSH without necessarily opening those ports up to the internet. And it then protects you from anybody scanning those ports and getting into your environment. Update management is another thing that I wanted to touch base on within this protection of your virtual machine in this quick episode. Some key things around update management is as you have a virtual machine within the Azure environment, this is a infrastructure as a service type device. So you are required to maintain and have the updates in place for for your operating system of that virtual machine. So you're going to need to put something in place and put some parameters in place on when you're going to update that machine, how you're going to how you're going to make sure it has all of its proper patches and security updates so that it is not vulnerable to any potential threats that may be found within the operating system. Update management helps you to automate that and to avoid any potential issues that might be caused by missing a potential patch update. So takes and automates that process, can schedule it. This update management can also be used on virtual machines within a hybrid network on your on-premises or in other clouds as well, so that every one of your virtual machines within the Azure hybrid infrastructure can be updated at the same time, so there are no vulnerabilities within your virtual machines outside of even the Azure environment. So it's a very helpful tool, another best practice and something to take into account as you go about building resources within the Azure environment. Let's talk about disk encryption a little bit now too. And some key things we've talked about: Azure Key Vault. We talked about storage accounts in our previous episode. When we're talking about virtual machines, there's a different type of disk encryption to think about, and that is Azure Disk Encryption. And the key thing around Azure Disk Encryption is this works within Windows devices utilizing BitLocker and within Linux virtual machines using dmcrypt. This is completely different than the storage account encryption of storage service encryption that we talked about in storage accounts. This is Azure Disk Encryption, and what this encrypts is it encrypts the operating system disks as well as the managed disks within the virtual machine build. So if you're going to be utilizing virtual machines with managed disks, it's important to turn on Azure Disk Encryption. And if you don't turn on Azure Disk Encryption, you'll see this noted within your recommendations in Security Center that increasing your secure score utilizing Azure Disk Encryption is recommended. So, this utilizes the Key Vault to store those keys and secrets for protection. So you can utilize your own on-premises HSN Key Vault, or again, we can go back, as we talked about a couple episodes ago, utilize Azure Key Vault to store that as well. Security Center, as I've noted a couple times, can help you with providing recommendations for best practices within your environment for virtual machine protection, as well as various other services within the Azure environment. It is a great point for a single point for what Security Center recommendations are needed with recommended configurations, critical updates that might be missing, endpoint protection recommendations, disk encryption, all of those things all come into Azure Security Center. And we're not going to hit a whole lot about Azure Security Center today, but I have a future episodes that's going to go into it in greater detail. But Security Center, like I said, is very helpful. It's turned on. The basic tier is turned on by default when you create a subscription within Azure, and it then provides recommendations to increase your level of protection within the environment and decrease vulnerabilities and detect threats. Last slide to just cover today is some things around securing your Azure workloads and understanding. Again, this kind of goes right along with that defense in depth strategy of what you want to do here and how you're going to protect your environment. And Microsoft provides within Security Center a lot of things around the benchmarks, around what they find within their best practices to establish those security baselines. And many of those benchmarks and technology have to do with our our virtual machines and our compute resources. And you can see, having logging and monitoring, identity and access management, which we covered in a previous episode, virtual machines, which we're covering right now, Security Center, as I mentioned, will be a future episode. Azure Storage Accounts. Next week, we'll be talking about databases and protecting SQL databases within our environment, and networking, which if you went back to go back to my previous series, I spent quite a few weeks going through different episodes and created quite a few episodes around networking and networking security and things like that. So it's important as you're going through building out and architecting within the Azure environment, taking these workloads and looking at these workloads and planning out how you're going to protect yourself against vulnerabilities going forward. So that's a key point, to just think about your level and what you need to do to protect resources, and what resources you even have within the environment that need to be protected. So key thing to think about there. So let's look at a couple ways that we can protect our virtual machines within Azure. And we're going to talk about, I'm going to cover just-in-time virtual machine access, and we're going to talk about Bastion host connections. I'm also going to really quickly show you Azure disk encryption and how that can be set up as well. So I'm in my Azure portal, and I've got my resource groups here, but I'm going to first I'm going to go into Azure Security Center and just show you real quick here what we can see here. We can see right away within Secure Score, just because this is in basic. I have a Defender subscription or standard subscription already turned on, but for those of you that are new to the Azure environment and are going into Azure for the first time and may not have that turned on, I'm showing it within the Azure recommendations and Secure Score, because everybody has that, whether it's a basic or a Defender / standard subscription. So we can see here within our environment different recommendations for our resources as well, and you can find within here different things around hosts and virtual machines, within identity and access permissions. You can find all of those in here. If I had a virtual machine that has ports open to the internet, I can see that within here as well. But let's go into one of my virtual machines and we can talk about certain things within here. So let me go into my VNet here and find my virtual machine. So if I go into my virtual machine, I can see different things in here in terms of my networking. If you can see here my different rules for network security groups, which we'll talk about in a couple episodes. My inbound and outbound rules. I don't have any rules for my virtual machine in terms of RDP ports. I don't have those inbound ports open, so you know that I'm protected. I could, if I had stood that up for port 3389 or SSH 22, I'd see that here. If I go to connect, you can see here it is telling me that to improve security, enable just-in-time virtual machine access, and I can click here and enable just-in-time. And what that's going to do is that's going to allow me to RDP into this virtual machine by asking permission to RDP, and then enabling, actually creating that port rule temporarily for my virtual machine within a period of time not to exceed 3 hours. So I can get temporary access and be able to RDP in temporarily within my virtual machine. The other way to do this is within Bastion, and if I utilize my Bastion host and connect to my Bastion, here you can see, rather than downloading the file for remote desktop for that virtual machine, I'm logging into this virtual machine directly from here. So I can go in right from here and connect, and it's going to send me right into this virtual machine. One of the nice things here is I created a Azure Bastion host within a virtual network of its own that is peered with my virtual machine. So that connection can traverse across peered networks now. It was not something that was available at first. You had to have that bastion essentially created for each VNet, and now you can peer those together. So that's just a nice feature there. But as you can see, it's much easier and much more secure than what it would be in terms of an RDP session, because we're not creating that public protection between that public opening of ports between our network and our virtual machine for somebody that might port scan. This is very much more secure and much more recommended way to connect to your virtual machines. If we had last thing I want to point out is Azure Disk Encryption. So if you go to Security Center and you view your virtual machine recommendations and you come down here to enable encryption at rest, you will find here disk encryption should be applied to your virtual machines. And you can see right here what you need to do to enable that disk encryption in terms of encryption instructions. This is going to send you out to Microsoft Docs, and you can come in here as well and trigger that logic app for that disk encryption, set up disk encryption for your virtual machines, and then you have encryption at rest across your operating system disk as well as the managed disks on that virtual machine, utilizing BitLocker for these, since these are both Windows machines. And like I said, if you're utilizing Linux, you'd be deploying DM encrypt on those Linux virtual machines. So those are some key things around disk encryption and utilizing those services for your virtual machines and utilizing and protecting those virtual machines within the Azure environment. That brings us to the end of this episode of Gimme Shelter Security in Azure. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode on virtual machine protection. We covered a lot of different topics within this. There's quite a bit to unpack when we're talking about virtual machine host protection, but wanted to give everybody a quick rundown and how they could work within the Azure environment to protect their virtual machines and secure our virtual machines when we're working in a infrastructure as a service type setup. Please follow me on social media, as well as subscribe to my YouTube channel for upcoming episodes and to view previous episodes. And I want to thank you for tuning in, and see you next week.